Welcome.
The New Mexico Momcast. I'm Vanessa Bush.
And I'm Becca Lesko-Toops. The New Mexico Momcast is a show from ABQ Mom for local moms as we navigate raising our kids in the land of enchantment.
And boy, do we have a topic about navigating raising kids today. Woo!
Do we ever? But it's difficult and something that I think because it's uncomfortable, we might have a tendency to avoid, but it's so incredibly important.
Right. And so we are interviewing just an amazing woman today, Shelley Repp. She's the executive director of the New Mexico Dream Center. And the New Mexico Dream Center, they work with human trafficking survivors, and they also work to prevent human trafficking and educate about human trafficking in our state. They're just doing a ton of good work. But she gives us all kinds of tips on how to avoid this with our own kids, and particularly some online help. Do you feel like it's so hard to monitor the online stuff? You have older kids too.
Well, and older, younger, everyone, the day and age we live in, this didn't used to exist. And so there's just this constant vigilance. I feel like I have to be engaged all the time and always aware of what's going on. Whereas, I mean, if they were just playing Monopoly, and with pickup sticks, I wouldn't have this same situation. But Shelley really does provide so many great informative resources and tips about online safety for our kids, because again, and she gets into this much more articulately than I would, but I think we think of trafficking like Taken, with Liam Neeson, and it's like your kid can be trafficked from their bedroom and you never know anything. And it really is them being, they're being predators we're giving them access to our houses through these devices and through our kids' access to the internet. So.
I think, we've talked about this before. It's become a trend to overprotect our kids in person in real life,
yes,
but underprotect them online. And that's pretty serious. So it's way safer today. I just saw some statistics. I should have written them down, but it's way safer today physically for kids. They're not doing the kind of risky behavior that you and I did. Well, you were probably better than me. Good job, Becca. But they're not engaging in risky behavior as much as we did 20, 30 years ago. But there's a ton of risk being just on video games and Roblox and all the different apps available. It's a thing.
I hate it so much. I also want to clarify there's something that Shelley references in this episode. She gives a resource, and I feel like, how when you're spelling your name to an operator online and you have to be like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, C as in. So the resource that she says to send parents to that is really important is thorn.org, THORN.org, like a thorn in your side, not anything else you might imagine.
Not anything else that thorn rhymes with.
Yeah. So I can't wait to listen in and have our listeners and our viewers on YouTube listen in as well.
Hey, local moms, it's time to shine a spotlight on your Albuquerque favorites. The 2025 ABQ Mom's Choice Awards are here, and we need your voice to crown the best of the best. From the coziest coffee shop to the pediatrician who's always there for your family, this is a chance to vote for the businesses, services, and experiences you love the most in the Albuquerque Metro. Now through March 3rd, let's celebrate the places and people that make Albuquerque home. Head to abqmom.com to submit your picks today. Well, Shelley, thanks so much for being on the New Mexico Momcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it, especially because my children are all adults, and so I'm kind of in this grandma role. So it's kind of like just a neat opportunity.
You do not seem like a grandma to me. Yeah, you're definitely.
I appreciate that. I will pay you a little later.
Well, I'm so glad we were finally able to make this interview happen. It's been a long time coming, and we made it happen. So, Shelley is the executive director of the New Mexico Dream Center. So, can you just kind of give us a brief overview? What is the New Mexico Dream Center? What kind of services do you provide for our state?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the New Mexico Dream Center, we do take a 360 degree approach to looking at the issue of trafficking. And so what that means is we are looking at things like push and pull factors for people entering into trafficking. What does it mean for somebody to come out of trafficking? What are practical ways to assist a trafficking survivor? And then what can we do to prevent trafficking from happening within our state? And so with that means we've got a couple of programs that we've developed around that whole mission. And so we do have an outreach aspect to trafficking, which is practical and applicable in people going out onto the streets looking for folks who are in unsafe situations. We have a drop-in center for unhoused youth here in Albuquerque because we have seen that there is a high degree of predatory trafficking for very vulnerable youth. And then we provide practical case management, connection to services, as well as a short-term stability shelter, and then longer-term transitional housing. So all of that to say we've got a lot of different things happening.
Yes, so many different programs that are doing so much good. I feel, I don't know, I just feel so lucky that I get to see sometimes like a little insider view of what's going on, because it's truly, truly like changing people's lives and and also bringing awareness to the community. And that's kind of some of the stuff I want to talk about today. Because human trafficking is sort of like a buzzword, right? And and it might be something that parents worry about. Obviously, we're talking to moms here, but there's also just so much misinformation out there. And so can you break down what you mean by human trafficking? What is it actually? What does it look like? And what is it not?
Right. Absolutely. So to show trafficking, I think one of the best things to kind of level the playing field is to look at what is the federal definition for human trafficking, and then what does that mean for the state of New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And so federally, they say that trafficking occurs when there is commercial sex or labor that is provided through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, in which the person providing that does not receive any sort of compensation. And that looks a little bit different if somebody is under the age of 18. So if you are over 18, you have to show force, fraud, or coercion. If you are under 18 with labor or sex, you do not have to show that force, fraud, or coercion. So essentially, in looking at something like sex trafficking, if there is, let's say, a teenager who is providing sex to just survive because they're unhoused, they're homeless on the street, well, they're still considered to be a human trafficking victim. So when we think about human trafficking, what you're looking at is you're looking at people who are providing a service who are not receiving compensation. And in general, then there are these mitigating factors of force, fraud, or coercion.
Okay.
Is that helpful? Or is that too?
No, that's very helpful. That's very helpful because I think, well, you and I have talked about this before, but when a lot of us think about human trafficking, we're imagining these like dramatic kidnapping situations, but that's not normally how it works, right? And some of the stuff that we see on social media is like fake. So what are really the more common ways traffickers target and exploit, particularly children, but anybody?
Yeah. So traffickers really look at things through a relational lens. So in thinking about who the trafficker is almost always going to be somebody that child has come into contact in one way or another. And so it's somebody that they are familiar with. Just as you said before, like a dramatic kidnapping almost never happens in the United States that ends up in a trafficking situation. And so we do have to acknowledge that globally, trafficking is going to look different on every single country, on all of the different communities. Trafficking is going to look different. So what we're talking about today is the type of trafficking that we see here in the United States. And what we really see is we see that based on relationships. And within even being based on relationships, we see 4 primary models that are recruitment methods for traffickers of children specifically.
And what are those 4?
So the first model we would call kind of a traditional, like people sometimes would say this is a pimp-led model. I hate the word pimp. Like I can't even, it bothers me to say it, but it is relationship-based trafficking that's built on a grooming relationship. So you have a trafficker who has encountered a young person and is grooming them to be in an exploitive relationship. Kind of in years past, specifically before 2020, when our world turned virtual, this really happened in person much more than it happens now. Nowadays, what we see is this almost exclusively happens online. And so we see this through social media apps. We see this through things like hookup apps, something where you're trying to find a date potentially. But the really scary thing, specifically with children, is that we see traffickers who are friending young kids through video game chats. So you're on these online video game chats and you don't know who's on the other side of that screen, and your parents don't know who's on the other side of that screen, and they can kind of pretend to be anybody. And so we've seen a real increase in that trafficking recruitment through those video game chats. And that's kind of what's scary. So that's the first most common method that we see, or model that we see. The second one that's almost equally as high when it comes to entering into trafficking is actually familial trafficking. So it is the trafficking that happens with families, which is just horrific to think about. But there are families, and there have been for years and years, where this is part of the DNA of that family. And so you would have perhaps grandfathers trafficking their grandchildren, aunts or uncles trafficking nieces and nephews and their own children. But it's something that's been part of the DNA of that family. And that's one aspect to familial trafficking. But there's a second branch to that. And that branch we really see here in Albuquerque and in a lot of urban areas. And that is when a family has really fallen into a desperate situation, more often than not because of substance use disorder. And this family's resources are gone because they've all been given to the use of these drugs. And so we see a fentanyl crisis. We see that with meth. And so they don't have resources anymore. And so then they resort to selling their children as a way to have that income for that. So those are the two most common. The third that we see after that would be gang affiliated trafficking. So that could be similar to familial in that you might have a family that's involved in a gang. But what we really do see is that gangs really do recruit young people, and that includes boys and girls. And coming into a gang has always been something that's always been traumatic. It's for girls especially, it's always been something that would be considered sexual violation. And so it's very easy for gangs then to use the girls coming into that gang as a way to create income. In the state of New Mexico, we have really poor legislation addressing this, which means that it is much safer for that gang to use that girl in sex trafficking instances to bring income in than it is for them to traffic drugs or to traffic weapons. So, and then the fourth one that we see is unhoused youth that are exploited. And we just have a really large number here in Albuquerque, but across the United States, in all of these urban areas, we have just seen a huge rise in this unhoused youth population. And traffickers know we're not looking at those kids. And so they're very vulnerable and they're very easy to be victimized by a trafficker.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of the unhoused youth, I know you all have the drop-in center, but just such is life, especially in the Albuquerque metro. A lot of us see these unhoused people, unhoused teens, often, and come into contact with them. What do you suggest, like, is the best way to help those young people?
Sure.
Especially?
So in looking at that, it is I always recommend that you have like what we would call like a hygiene bag or a survival bag that you carry with you, because you don't know when you're necessarily going to see them. And so it's just a Ziploc bag with basic supplies. So you can have some shelf-stable food, definitely water, socks, some hygiene items, something like that you can give them if you feel comfortable in doing something like that. So you can always do that. The other way that you can really support these young people is I feel like it's really important for all of us to be aware of legislation that affects our children. And many of these young people that are on the street have been in either the juvenile justice system or in children, youth, and families. So they've been with their system-involved kids in one way or another. And so knowing what is happening with our kids across the state is very important for us to know. So I think that being aware that we've got a really overburdened system with a lot of system fails is important. Then the third thing I would say is that when you support an organization that helps unhoused youth, you are ultimately supporting them. So that could, of course, be us as New Mexico Dream Center, but there are other agencies that do really great work. And I would say specifically New Day Youth and Family Shelter has a shelter for unhoused youth. And then Youth Development Incorporated, we call it YDI. They also have a shelter and have actually put together a couple of other options for young people who are unhoused. And so when you're supporting those kinds of organizations, essentially those dollars are going into programming to help those young people that are on the streets.
Great tips. So we do have an article on our website on ABQ Mom about how to assemble some of those hygiene bags that Shelley mentioned. And there's also like a free printable that does have contact info for the Dream Center and some of those other organizations that you can kind of put in the bag so that they have those resources available to them. So I will tell you, one of my kids, my middle guy, is so judgmental. If we come across a homeless person and I don't have one of those, he's like, I can't believe you ran out. You're like such a bad person. He's like,
those
really
little kids, they can be tough.
Very strongly about the hygiene bags.
Well, good for him though, because you know what you want, Vanessa, is you want to ultimately raise children that care for their people, that care for their community, and so kudos to you in having that young kid, or your teenager. I know he's a teenager who's concerned about social issues. I think that's important. I want him to have that wide view of what's happening in our world.
Me too. So important. Okay. Well, just to get back to we were talking earlier about, just different types of trafficking. And I know obviously anyone can become a victim of human trafficking. It can happen to anyone, but there are really people with specific vulnerabilities. And so what are maybe some risk factors that might make a child in particular more likely to be targeted?
Right. So, a lot of times when we talk about this, people automatically jump to like socioeconomic risk factors. And they're like, well, because they're in a poverty-ridden home or something. And that can be a part of it. But really what we see is kids who have what we call an ACE score. So adverse childhood experiences, which is an actual score that can be done through a variety of different organizations and even online. And what this ACE score does is it shows different types of things that have happened within a child's life, and those equal long-term impact. And so somebody with a high ACE score is much more likely to end up in a trafficking situation than somebody with a low ACE score. So some of those things that go into that ACE score is that child being a victim of violence, that child observing violence, that child having a sexual encounter by an adult. So if they were molested, these are the types of things that contribute to this ACE score. And when you have that, you develop those vulnerabilities that just allow somebody to be more manipulative in your life, or you end up in situations that are more risky or dangerous. And so that ACE score is a huge indicator of somebody who could end up in a really dangerous situation.
Great info. So as parents, we want to really lower those vulnerabilities for our kids.
Yes.
And so what are some things we can do to help protect them?
So I would say that having a really solid home life is very, very important. And we know that. We've talked about these kinds of things, across the United States, not just you and I that have talked about it, Vanessa, but the world. But in looking at that, when you have a really solid home life with your kid, where your teenager or your kid feels like they can talk to a parent or a safe adult about scary or compromising things, then that is a protective measure right there. And it is a huge, huge one. So I think looking at what does that mean for you as a family? Does it mean working on having a really solid marriage with your husband? If you're a single parent, what does that mean in who are the safe people that can be in that child's life? Because those are kind of some of the safest types of things that you can do. The other thing I would say is we need to not be afraid to talk to our kids about sex. and leaning into those difficult situations and those difficult conversations, and not just sex, but anything that would be around that we would say would be taboo. So talking about drug use, talking about partying with friends, talking about those kinds of things where you could have somebody in a potentially unsafe situation is hugely important. And then the other thing I would say is you need to be really aware of who your children's friends are. Not only their physical ones that you would maybe see at school, but who are their online friends? Who is it that they are interacting with online? And, there's all these studies now that this is where, young people, this young generation ends up meeting their best friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend is through these online relationships. And so knowing who those people are is just really, really important.
So important. I remember you said this a long time ago to me, probably when we first met, and you're like, the best thing you can do to keep your kids safe is just have family dinner as often as you can every night. And I was like, really? That's it? But that was also before 2020 and all the internet stuff. So do you have any tips for maybe keeping young people safer
Sure.
online?
Yeah. So you need to have some real conversations with your kids about what online predation looks like. And there is a lot of really good material and videos and things out there that you can show your kids. A couple of really good resources. One is thorn.org. So again, thorn.org. And the reason is because they have some really intuitive and really cool videos for younger people that talk about things like sextortion, sexploitation, which are things that can happen with any young person at all. And so having those kinds of conversations, having those kids watch those videos, I think is super, super important so that they understand what they can do to protect themselves, and then that you as the parent are aware that this is going on so they can come to you and talk to you if something like this happens. And so those kinds of conversations are important. The other thing is you really do need to monitor that online relationship building with your child. And so I had mentioned previously that online video game chats are a place where, you don't know who's chatting with your kid. And depending on their age, there may be different permission levels that you can allow. People that are local versus people that are national versus people that are, across the world. The other thing is that we need to be wise to the strategies of somebody who is trying to exploit your kid. So one of the things we've seen with those online video chats is that when somebody starts that relationship and it looks like it's building through that video chat, that's pretty easy for a parent to monitor. And so what a trafficker would likely do, or not even a trafficker, but somebody who might just not have good intentions, is that they will potentially pivot that chat to something that seems easier to kind of get by with the parents. So the example that we have seen that to us, I think was the most startling was a video chat that then pivoted to downloading a coloring book app. And that young person and that potential trafficker, that exploiter, then began that chat on that on that coloring book app. So what that means is that you need to know what your kids are downloading. And so I do not believe that if you as the parent are paying that cell phone bill, that they can download anything without permission from a parent. So you need to know. So if your child then downloads this coloring book app and you're like, what? A coloring book app, that you're then investigating and looking at what that is and what's happening within anything like that. So if kid can download and you don't know what's happening, then you've kind of lost this little piece to the puzzle potentially with something like that. So being super aware of what their online activity is.
Whew. And it's like a part-time job, like keeping track of your kids.
So it is, but there are tools out there. There are tools to help parents with this, which thank God there are.
There's lots of them out there. Bark is a good one, I know, and there's a lot of good ones, but it's a lot of work too. But it's so important. I just don't want to I know you parents out there are working hard. It's tough. So we've talked a whole lot about prevention, and But what about kids who've already been exploited, like the ones that you're working with? How does New Mexico Dream Center step in to help them? What are some of the resources that you guys provide? Yeah.
Sure. So it's really going to depend a lot on how that person is referred to us, how that young person is referred to us. So if they are coming to us as somebody who is an unhoused youth, then they're most likely coming in through the harbor. And so we're working on just really building some basic services, putting some basic services in place for them so that they can have a safe place to be, and then just kind of start figuring out what does going forward in a positive and beneficial way look for them. And so there's a lot of that young person who's kind of got to be accountable for themselves because they are on the street. And so that's going to look different than a kid who has been referred to us because they were picked up in a law enforcement sting, or a kid who's been referred to us from CYFD. So in looking at that, we provide services and supports around whoever the supports around that child are. So for example, we've had a young person who was referred to us through CYFD, but they were in the custody of some other relatives. So they were not in the custody of their parents anymore, but they were with some other relatives. And so what we were able to do then is we were able to offer support to those relatives in a safe place to ask questions, kind of going through these kinds of topics of, hey, this is what you should be looking for on a cell phone. Let's talk about what reasonable discipline looks like for something like this. And then what are some good referrals for that kid for mental health care, behavioral health care? What does that look like? So in supporting those people who are supporting that kid, that's the best way that we can help somebody who's not coming into our program specifically. If they're into our program specifically, it's because they've likely been unhoused. And so then it's us finding shelter or getting them into one of our housing programs to be able to provide that stability. And then it really is that one-on-one relationship building that's really, really important. I can't express enough that safe relationships are huge, because relationships kill people and relationships heal people. So being a person who is a relationship healer, I think, is a really important place to be.
I've heard recently, like it makes or breaks like a teenager's journey, whether they have like obviously involved parents, but even just like a teacher or some type of youth minister or something like that who takes an interest in that child and becomes invested in the kid and really cares about them, but having like that other additional caring adults in their lives just really changes trajectory of everything.
It does. And I think that's something that we as parents need to realize and want to build within our kids, is that there are going to be some things that it's just unlikely that our kids are going to tell us, and it's going to be hard for us to hear those things. And so having another safe adult, so whether that's like a cool aunt that they feel like they can talk to, that's a safe person, or that teacher or counselor at school, somebody who is going to give them good advice and somebody that is going to be trustworthy is huge. That's so, so important.
Yes, love it. So, okay, if somebody listening today is just as enthralled with New Mexico Dream Center as I am and really wants to take action, whether it's what are some opportunities? Is it volunteering, donating, spreading awareness? What's the best way to maybe get involved with the Dream Center and really support the mission that you guys are doing?
Absolutely. So we are a nonprofit, and we live up to that name, Vanessa, which means we don't have tons of money. So obviously,
much.
Yeah. So financial donations are always appreciated, which you can go onto our website and there's a really obvious like donate button with something like that. And that might be what some people are able to do. We do have volunteers, and we have a pretty robust volunteer program in that we do have volunteers who come and can work side by side with our young people. There's a pretty big training element that goes with that, as well as a lot of vetting. So we do require background checks, fingerprinting. There's quite a bit that goes into something like that. But then there might be people who have different businesses that are like, we want to support you in, and maybe we can do that through our business. And that could be like a drive. We give out a lot of food to a lot of hungry teens. And so having a pantry drive to fill our pantry would be huge. We always need bottled water for our outreach program. We love when people can provide hot meals for either our shelter or for the harbor, where they can bring homemade food for these young people. And that's huge. And so those are a few of the things that would be great. If somebody has a special skill, so like maybe you're a contractor and you have a lot of construction buddies. Well, let me just tell you, I got a house that needs some help. So there are things like that that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of ways to say, oh, I have this skill or this ability, and be able to use that on behalf of Dream Center. So there's all kinds of things on the website on ways you can contact Shelley or one of her staff to offer your services. But also, if you just follow Dream Center on social media, there are often like drives or Amazon lists, or like, hey, one of our clients is having a baby. Can we donate diapers and clothes and all of that? So a lot of that stuff comes up on their social media channels fairly often.
Pretty regularly.
Yeah.
Well, and we have a golf tournament coming up. So
yes,
if you play golf, help us out.
If you're a golfer, you join that golf tournament.
Yes.
And have a fun day. All right. Well, Shelley, we ask all of our guests, is there like a special place in Albuquerque or the greater city that you just love to go, that you recommend to people, just a special spot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an avid dog walker. Like, I feel like that's part of like my mental health. And so I would say that we have the best open space areas. So I love walking my dog along the bosque, and I love walking her up like in the foothills. And to me, I think being out in nature and being able to see the beauty of that and the peace of that is awesome. So I would recommend any of our like open space areas that we have here in the Albuquerque metro area.
You do have some great trails. Well, Shelley, we really appreciate your being with us today, and everything that you do for our community is so appreciated. And I hope that you know that ABQ Mom is behind you and really wants to see the success of New Mexico Dream Center and just eradicating human trafficking in our state. What a great thing that would be.
Awesome. It would be. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thanks for tuning in to the New Mexico Momcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you can never miss an episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love it if you left us a review. It helps more moms find us. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at NMMomcast and at ABQMom_ for more connection, resources, and updates. See you next time.